Hello, I am so honored to have some time with you virtually. Your nursing specialty impacts all of us as patients and families, and what could be more important than managing pain during difficult times of illness and surgery and injury, all the things you deal with. So thank you to ASPMN for this wonderful opportunity. You know how when you record a presentation and you have PowerPoint slides, your face ends up being in a little box in the corner? Well, I prefer not to distract you with that, so I'm turning off my camera so you can just sit back and listen and watch. I hope that's okay with you. Here goes. Well, let's start with objectives. At the conclusion of this presentation, I hope you'll be able to describe the history of the DAISY Foundation and all that we honor in nursing. I hope you'll be able to describe the impact of meaningful recognition on nurses and organizations and on the patient and family experience. And finally, I hope you'll feel the gratitude of patients and families to you as pain management nurses. Well, DAISY is all about stories. Stories of nursing care that make a difference, especially to patients and families. So let's start with our story. On November 6, 1999, my stepson Patrick died of complications of the autoimmune disease ITP. That was the day our world changed. His passing came after the worst 8 weeks of our lives that we spent with him in 2 different hospitals, whose doctors and nurses fought to help him stop producing antibodies that were destroying his platelets and making him bleed internally. Truly, I try not to go back to those dark weeks in our lives very often, but I will share with you that among the many horrible memories I have from those weeks was the extreme pain Patrick was in from his internal bleeding. As you may know, ITP can be a gruesome condition at its worst, and Patrick's ITP was out of control. And then he was gone. We had been on an emotional roller coaster for 2 months, and suddenly it was over. Now what do we do? How could we keep Patrick's wonderful spirit alive? How could we fill that gaping hole in our hearts his death had left? And how could we turn our lives to something positive, given the depth of loss we felt? Well, right after Patrick died, my husband Mark, Pat's wife Tina, and I searched for that something positive over dinner. And with us was our brand new grandbaby, Riley. She had been born just 6 weeks before Patrick got sick. Well, as we talked and the tears flowed, we found ourselves reflecting on the care of Patrick's nurses. Their clinical excellence was impressive, just as we expected it would be, especially given how complex his condition was. But it was the way they delivered their care that really took our hearts. His nurses' compassion, their sensitivity, and their kindness, not only to Patrick, but to all of us in our family, that's what held us together during our experience in the hospital. And we felt compelled to say thank you. In fact, relevant to what you all do in nursing, we had witnessed Patrick in such extreme pain throughout those first several weeks of his illness, prior to him being ventilated and sedated. But I'll never forget flying from Amarillo, Texas to Seattle with Patrick on an ambulance plane. We were going there in hopes of him having a bone marrow transplant that he never got to have. But on that flight, he went into a pain crisis. Watching his nurse Robert deal with Patrick's pain with very few resources on a tiny airplane with just the pilot, Patrick, and me, well, that was among the many experiences we had with Patrick's nurses that inspired us to start DAISY. Managing Patrick's pain was a priority for his nurses, those who specialized in pain management as you do, and also those who cared for him as he battled this terrible condition. So over dinner, we created the DAISY Foundation to say thank you to nurses for all you do and for the way you do it. DAISY stands for Diseases Attacking the Immune System, to keep us rooted in our experience with Patrick and his nurses. And we created the DAISY Award for Extraordinary Nurses as a way for patients and families and nurses' colleagues to be able to share their gratitude by writing their stories of care that made a difference, care that went above and beyond a nurse's job description. We wanted to celebrate those stories with a monthly recognition ceremony among the nurses' peers. Well, when we started the DAISY Award in the hospital that cared for Patrick at the end of his life, we hoped we would get to say thank you to nurses in, 5 or 10 hospitals around the United States. So you can imagine how surprised we are that now, 25 years later, we are partnering with over 7,500 healthcare facilities and nursing schools throughout the United States and in 43 other countries as well. Over 260,000 nurses have been honored so far, with nominations that share the story of their compassion and excellence. But most important to us, over 3.5 million times, a patient, a family member, or a coworker has taken the time to share their story of their nurse's impact. Over 3.5 million times, the story of a nurse's care for a patient or a family has been written in gratitude to that nurse. What do all these nominations describe? Well, most of them talk not about what a nurse did for a patient in terms of clinical care. Rather, they describe the way their care was delivered, with compassion that made a profound difference to patients and their families, a difference they'll never forget, and a story they have to tell, just as we do. Helping patients cope with pain is a pervasive theme in DAISY nominations, and often it is the most emotionally described. So I'd like to share a few excerpts from nominations that reveal the power of what you do when you manage pain. Let's start with a veteran in Lexington, Kentucky, who wrote about his nurse, Kathleen Stapp, who was caring for him following what should have been a routine pacemaker insertion. Here's what he said. The pain worsened until I felt I had a band of pain around my chest and my back. Perhaps I should have been scared. I had never experienced such intense and continuous pain. But I was not scared because I was confident that the nurse had everything under control. I was certain that she would make everything okay and that I was receiving the best care I could get. She took my pain seriously, and despite my helplessness, she treated me with a highly professional dignity. Her incessant coordination resulted in my receiving treatment as quickly as possible. Her unique blend of experience, knowledge, professionalism, and empathy kept me from panicking and from being afraid. Well done, Kathleen. A patient at Kettering Health in Dayton, Ohio, wrote about his nurse, Amanda Moon. Mandy could tell that I was in extreme pain. I felt like I was going crazy. When she came in to see me that morning, she recognized the pain, and I felt like she saved me. She was able to get orders for pain meds, spent time with me, and talked to me. It was such a relief after I had suffered through the night. That entire night had been horrible, but Mandy was wonderful, and I can't thank her enough. And then there is Samantha. I love reading nominations that are written for nurses by nurses who are patients, because sometimes they're surprised to find out how much compassionate care makes a difference. Well, Samantha Freiberger at Allen Hospital in Waterloo, Iowa, had a nurse practitioner for a patient, and here's what she wrote. Samantha's bedside manner reminded me that there is still hope in healthcare, as we all know, because bedside care can be a huge source of burnout. I can speak on this, being a nurse practitioner and a previous bedside nurse in acute care. The demands are there. Every time she came into my room, she had a smile on her face, and regardless of whether she was stressed or not, she never showed it. When I was in distress from pain, she remained by my side, ensuring me she was there for me, and that she had already requested the provider to come see me to help manage my pain more adequately. I was being administered multiple medications at different times around the clock, and she made sure they were administered on the dot to help keep up with my pain control. She stayed by my side even at shift change and until I went to pre-op. I hope she knows how comforting it is as a patient to have such a compassionate and caring nurse taking care of you. Being on the patient side of healthcare, you know there are other patients who are more critical than you are and have it a lot worse off than you. Samantha validated my presenting condition and made me feel heard. Samantha was absolutely devoted to me that day and being my nurse, despite having other patients to care for beside me. She did a wonderful job. Well, I don't know if Kathleen and Mandy and Samantha are especially trained as pain management nurses. However, I suspect that nurses who work in pain and spine centers may have that knowledge. So let me introduce you to Katie Russell. She works at the Edgerton Pain and Spine Center in Edgerton, Wisconsin. And here's what her patient wrote. Katie's genuine compassion and attentiveness helped calm my nerves and showed me I was more than just another patient to this clinic and this team. She set the tone for my experience with the Edgerton Pain and Spine Center and helped me communicate with the doctor effectively and find an answer to what was causing my pain. Thank you, KD, for caring and for your role in getting me back to a pain-free and normal life. I have to admit that in preparing for this talk, I found my eyes flooded with tears as I read so many DAISY stories of nurses who addressed their patients' care effectively and compassionately, so much so that they felt compelled to write a DAISY nomination. Your work in pain management is at the pinnacle of what we created DAISY to honor. Your patients frequently describe you as angels. They say they don't know what they would have done had you not done all you did, how you advocated for them, how you took their pain seriously and would not stop until you found relief for them, how your presence comforted them when they were in excruciating pain, how your confidence uplifted them, how your expertise was clothed in compassion that made them know you felt their humanity and preserved their dignity. I recognize all this as these feelings bring up memories of Patrick's nurses, especially when his pain was out of control. Over the years, DAISY has evolved from our initial focus on honoring what we initially referred to as bedside nurses, and now we call direct care nurses, to now honoring nurses wherever you practice, wherever you are in your careers. As a result, we now honor nurse-led interdisciplinary teams for special acts of compassion they do together for patients and families. We have an award for nurse leaders who create the environment where all this compassionate care takes place and where nurses thrive. We honor nurse educators, both in nursing schools and in healthcare organizations. Your education gives nurses not only the evidence-based practices they need to provide excellent care, but you also give them the confidence to support patients on their healthcare journey. There is a DAISY Award for nursing students whose patients are grateful for their compassion that's delivered during their clinical rotations. For nurses advancing health equity, and for those whose practice and leadership shines a light on the nursing code of ethics. And finally, for nurses who have dedicated decades of their lives to extraordinary nursing and leadership, well, they may be honored with our DAISY Lifetime Achievement Award. We also partner with national professional organizations to honor patient safety, nurses advancing compassionate care through policy, nurses who excel in ethical practice and leadership, and nurse scientists. Nurses are being honored in every setting where nurses work, and of course in hospitals, but also in surgery centers, pain clinics, military bases and VA facilities, prisons, public schools, senior living homes, and so many more. As I said, wherever nurses practice, DAISY is there to remind you of the difference you make every day, to remind you why you became a nurse. The impact of DAISY as a form of meaningful recognition as a result is now well researched and well documented. It is indeed in itself an evidence-based practice. And over the years, research has revealed that what our family started as a way for us to deal with our grief now has powerful strategic value for nursing and healthcare organizations because it impacts organizational culture. Our emphasis is on ongoing recognition of nursing excellence with the DAISY Award ceremonies taking place throughout the year. And also throughout the year, the program calls for recognition of every nurse who is nominated, not only those who have selected, but being nominated. Getting a copy of the nomination and receiving a DAISY nominee pin like the one you see here provides powerful positive feedback to a nurse that is meaningful recognition of that nurse's excellence. As meaningful recognition, these nominations tie you back to your purpose because they come from the people who matter most to you, your patients, patient family members, and coworkers. To impact organizational culture and generate nominations, Our healthcare partners create wide awareness of DAISY, informing the public and the staff that they can nominate nurses for this International Award of Excellence. And our partners publicly celebrate the nurses who've been both nominated and honored. All of this creates a culture of meaningful recognition that helps the public know that nursing excellence is taking place inside this organization. So let's talk about what we mean by meaningful recognition and how it contributes to a culture of well-being. I like to think of meaningful recognition as recognition on steroids. But Dr. Cindy Lefton, who is a trauma nurse and whose PhD is in organizational psychology, has studied recognition extensively. She concludes that meaningful recognition involves acknowledging one's behaviors and the impact these actions had on others. It ensures the feedback is relevant to the recognized situation and that it's equal to the person's contribution. But what also makes recognition like these nominations truly, truly meaningful is that the longevity of the effect goes on and on. Meaningful recognition resonates throughout a person's life when they receive it. We're told that nurses hold on to their DAISY nominations and read them again and again. We know how proud they are of their nominee pins because we get thousands of requests a year to replace lost or broken pins. We created a framework to describe the impact of building a culture of meaningful recognition, impact that's revealed in numerous studies that have been conducted using DAISY as a proxy to represent meaningful recognition. Let's start with the impact on healthcare organizations. The first evidence of the importance of the work environment was developed in research conducted by the American Association of Critical Care Nurses. They identified the characteristics of a healthy work environment that motivates nurses to stay in their roles. This was published in 2005, and it's been validated repeatedly since then. AACN concluded that there are 6 standards, all of which must be present to create a healthy work environment where nurses can do their best work. But they may say there's no standard that's more important than the others, but I have to tell you, I slightly disagree. It takes all 6 standards to be in place for a work environment to be at its best. And when all 6 healthy work environment standards are present, including meaningful recognition, nurses report higher job satisfaction, less burnout, less fatigue, and importantly, lower intent to leave. And that translates to better nurse retention for their organizations. So the bottom line is that a healthy, positive work environment that includes a robust, meaningful recognition program has a positive impact on nurses' well-being, on their resilience, and on retention. The second aspect of DAISY's impact is on nurse engagement. We know that when recognition is lacking, compassion fatigue, burnout, and secondary traumatic stress are more likely to be prevalent. If nurses experienced only compassion fatigue in their work, well, we wouldn't have very many nurses. That's because the effects of compassion fatigue include emotional distress, moral distress, risks to patient safety, loss of empathy, poor judgment, work days lost, and a desire to quit not only the organization where a nurse works, but even the nursing profession altogether. The counterbalance to compassion fatigue is compassion satisfaction. This is a sense of joy about a job well done. When compassion satisfaction rules the day, nurses feel an increase in caring. They sense their contribution. They experience more energized moments, which can help to fuel their creativity and innovation. This ultimately plays out in increased satisfaction with their work that leads to engagement and retention as nurses. In research conducted a few years ago by Drs. Lefton and Leslie Kelly, the relationship between meaningful recognition and compassion fatigue was explored among critical care nurses. This research revealed that nurses nominated for the DAISY Award had lower levels of compassion fatigue. These nominees had been made aware of the difference they made by recognition from grateful patients. The study concluded that not only did receiving the DAISY Award improve compassion satisfaction scores, but receiving a nomination for the DAISY Award had a positive impact on compassion satisfaction as well. Meaningful recognition was shown to counter the negative impact of compassion fatigue and reduce the negative consequences for healthcare organizations. Finally, our framework looks at how meaningful recognition impacts patients and families. What does it mean to people who get to express their gratitude to their nurses through their DAISY nomination? This question had been on our minds for a long time as we saw nominations coming and counting into the millions. It was clear that patients and families want and need to say thank you to their nurses. We wanted to explore what they got out of doing this. One of our board members, Dr. Susan Grant, who is a leader in patient and family-centered care, led a qualitative study among the people who wrote DAISY nominations for nurses in her health system. The interviews Dr. Grant and her co-investigators conducted revealed three themes. First, it was clear how much nominators wanted to talk about their care experience, to share their story of what they thought was an extraordinary healthcare experience. Interestingly, participants went to great lengths to describe their nurses' behaviors, despite the interviewers' efforts to redirect them to talk about how it felt to them to nominate a nurse. The second theme described in that study says that expressing gratitude, patients felt a better balance in their relationship with their nurse. What the research described as a synergy of the human connection. Their nurse had done so much for them, and now they could do something in return for their nurse. And third, the study uncovered that patients' gratitude often goes beyond the moment of their expression. It's a long-lasting thing for the person who wrote the nomination. A tangible example of this, I can't count the number of nominations for labor and delivery nurses who've had babies named for them, nor the number of nominations that conclude, "I will never forget my beloved nurse," or words to that effect. As I said, patients and families want and need to say thank you to their nurses. It's a part of their healing process. It helps fuel their resilience and their recovery. And we're delighted that this study on patient outcomes of DAISY is part of the literature on meaningful recognition. Well, while this study was published in 2019 in Nurse Leader, we were not satisfied that we had learned enough about how DAISY impacts the people who write nominations. So an extensive study of nominators in multiple facilities throughout the country was recently launched. It's led by Memorial Hermann's Center for Nursing Excellence, and we can't wait to see what it uncovers. Our belief is that its findings will provide more keys to helping strengthen the relationship between the public and nursing. So one more look at the evidence framework. To summarize, there are numerous benefits to creating a culture of meaningful recognition, a culture that is positive and healthy for employees, and it makes a difference for patients and families as well. We talk about shining a light on all the right because we know that as healthcare professionals, when something goes wrong, you stop and you take the time to analyze what led to the problem, what its root causes were, and you develop a process to ensure that it doesn't happen again. We know how important it is for you to stop and celebrate when something goes right. Shining the light on all the right is culture changing, and the process we've developed around the DAISY Award gives you a structured, high-integrity way to focus on the positive and take advantage of a positive environment's many benefits that we've just looked at. Sometimes in the busyness and the pressure of all you have going on, I think you forget about the difference you make. DAISY's mission is to make sure you never forget that in times of pain and sorrow, and also in times of joy, you are there for your patients and their families. Whether you are providing direct patient care and addressing pain, or you're conducting research, you're educating and advocating for clinicians to help them provide better holistic pain management, you are making a difference. And we, as patients and family members, are forever grateful to you for your commitment, your expertise, and for your compassion. So with that, I would like to turn this presentation over to the love of my life, my husband, Mark, the man I believe is DAISY's guiding light, because he has a few words to say to you as well.
Thank you, Vaughn. But we're not the only ones who need to say thank you to nurses. You know, over the years, we've heard many stories and read many nominations of nurses, but to me, one has always stood out. The patient began his nurse nomination with these words: "She gave me the will to live." He further wrote, I had had lots of surgeries over the last few years and I was tired. I was ready to go. I had had a good life and I was now in a lot of pain. I just didn't want to do this anymore. She changed that. She gave me the will to live. What the patient remembered was the nurse sitting by his bed holding his hand, telling him it was going to be all right, talking about his wife, his kids, his grandkids, and his friends, of telling him jokes, of smiling at him every time she passed his door, and telling him his beloved Chicago Cubbies were going to win it all this year, and he needed to be there for them. In other words, she didn't do anything special. She was just doing her job, but she was doing something that was pretty special to him. She was giving him the will to live. She was saving his life. And think what an impact this was. Think of all the people that were affected. A man went home to his wife. 4 children were able to spend more time with dad. 7 current grandchildren, and probably more in the future, could keep visiting him, etc., etc., etc. Nurses just doing their jobs have such an impact on the lives of so many people. That's why we ask at each DAISY presentation that each nurse pause for just a moment and realize how truly special they are and what a difference they make in the lives of so many people. Every day, nurses do something to make the world a better place for their patients and their families. So in conclusion, I would like to continue to fulfill the mission of DAISY Foundation by thanking you for being nurses. The following are some of the special nominations that I recall over the years where a patient thanked their nurses. Thank them for working with almost every department in the hospital to bring 15 tons of snow to a Los Angeles hospital and arranging for a terminally ill young father to fulfill his wish for a day in the snow with him and his daughter. And thanks for arranging for Elsa and Olaf from the movie Frozen to show up. Thank you for temporarily adopting a homeless man's dog when his hospital stay was greatly extended. Thank you for working with transport and using almost every life support mechanism known to transport a dying grandfather up to see his granddaughter who had just been born at the same hospital. He was able to hold her and name her before he passed away later that same day. Thank you for going to the store to buy that special ice cream treat for your patient that had no appetite. Thank you for staying past your shift when the dying patient with no one else could, because you know no one should ever die alone. Thanks for making sure that Tiger and Pooh Bear are in the recovery room when your young patient wakes up from surgery. Thank you for going through the trash in the basement to find an elderly patient's treasure that housekeeping had thrown away because they thought it was trash. Thank you for giving a shave and a haircut to the homeless man after he died, so his parents who hadn't seen him in 3 years would remember him as he was, not what he had become. And thank you for smuggling Cotton the dog into the patient's room so he could say goodbye to his special friend of 11 years. One of my favorites is to thank you for bringing in a bottle of gin and vermouth so the couple that had been married for 63 years could have their nightly cocktail while she was recovering from some minor surgery. And I would like to close with just a couple of personal thank yous. Even though he didn't eat much, thank you for that special room decoration and the spaghetti dinner you fixed for Pat and Tina on their anniversary. Thank you to the night nurse for taking your breaks in Pat's room and playing sports trivia with him when he couldn't sleep. And a special thank you for that hug when life support was turned off. In other words, thank you all for just doing your job. Thank you for doing so many special things. Thank you for being nurses.